Imagine this, a little girl no older than 12, barefoot, her clothes torn and caked in dust, walking through a mountain of rotting trash under a blazing sun. Her stomach growls, her feet are blistered, and the stench of decay clings to her skin. She's not there by choice. She's there because survival leaves no room for dreams, only desperation. Her name is Amaka. And in that moment, as she sifts through broken bottles and spoiled food, she has no idea that her life is about to change in a way no one could ever predict. But then, a sound cuts through the silence of the dump. Faint, weak, fragile, a cry, not the cry of an animal or the wind, a baby's cry. Her heart stops. She drops her sack and runs toward the noise, bare feet slapping against the mud. Flies buzz in angry clouds. The stench is unbearable. And there, wrapped in a filthy, torn blanket, lies a tiny bundle, a newborn baby, pale and shivering, abandoned like trash. Amaka falls to her knees. She doesn't think, she doesn't hesitate. She pulls the baby close, wraps her in her only scarf, and whispers, "You're not dying here, I won't let you." And in that moment, something shifts, not just in her life, in the universe. Because this baby, this helpless, freezing child left to die, is not just anyone. She is the lost daughter of one of the richest men in Nigeria, the only heir to a billionaire's empire, stolen at birth by greedy relatives who wanted the fortune for themselves, left to die in the gutters so power could pass into their hands. But fate had other plans, and it chose Amaka, a girl with nothing but love in her heart, to be the one to save her. Now fast forward. Picture this, a convoy of black SUVs gliding through the city. Sirens blare, people scatter. And inside the lead vehicle sits Chief Anjuka, a man broken by grief. His wife died giving birth to their child, and days later the baby vanished. No trace, no clues, just silence. He mourned her as dead, buried his heart with his wife, lived in a mansion of marble and gold, but his soul was empty, until one day, until he sees her, in the arms of a ragged, starving girl standing by the roadside begging for milk. Around the baby's neck a golden necklace, an heirloom. The last gift his dying wife gave their child, a secret only he and his closest family knew about. His breath catches. His world stops. He orders the car to halt, steps out, kneels on the hot, dusty road. Tears stream down his face as he reaches for the child, his daughter, alive, breathing, saved by a girl who had nothing, yet gave everything. And when he turns to Amaka, trembling and afraid, he doesn't offer money. He doesn't hand her a check. He looks into her eyes and says, "You saved my life," because she did. But here's what will break your heart and then rebuild it. Amaka doesn't ask for riches, doesn't beg for a mansion or a new life. She whispers, tears in her eyes, "Please help my mother, she's sick, she's dying." And in that moment, a billionaire, a man used to power and control, is humbled by the purest act of selflessness he's ever witnessed. Because while the world measures worth in money, in status, in bloodlines, this little girl, raised in a shack on sinking mud, taught everyone what true value really is. Love, sacrifice, courage. This isn't just a story about a lost child found. It's about how one act of kindness, one decision to do the right thing when no one was watching, can ripple across lives, shatter destinies, and rewrite futures. It's about how the lowest can rise not because of luck, but because of heart. And it all started in a dump, with a cry, and a girl who refused to walk away. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the swamp, to the house made of rusted zinc and plastic bags, to the nights when rain poured through the roof and rats scurried over their thin mat, to a mother named Mama Amaka, barely surviving, paying $5 a month for a shelter that wasn't even a real home. And to a little girl who dreamed of school, of becoming a lawyer, of building her mother a house where no rain could ever leak in. But dreams don't feed the hungry. And when Mama Amaka stepped on a rusty nail while scavenging for trash, infection set in fast. No money for medicine. No doctor would come. And Amaka, just 12 years old, made a promise. She would take her mother's place. She would pick trash. She would sell scraps. She would save her. And so every morning she walked barefoot to the dump, her small hands digging through filth, her back aching under the weight of the sack, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. She was a child playing the role of a parent. And then she found the baby, and everything changed. Because in that moment she didn't just save a life. She picked up destiny, And destiny, once held, never lets go. The city never sleeps, not really. Even in the quiet hours when most homes are dark and dreams are deep, there's a pulse beneath the streets, a rhythm of survival, of people who don't rest because rest means hunger, means danger, means losing what little they have. And in one corner of that restless city where the air smells of damp earth and rotting food, a little girl named Amaka had just done the impossible. She didn't know it yet. How could she? She was only 12. Her feet were cracked from walking barefoot on hot tar and sharp stones. Her clothes hung off her like rags on a wire. She had never worn shoes, never tasted clean water from a tap, never seen a book with her name in it. But she had done something no king, no politician, no billionaire could claim. She had saved a life when no one was watching. And she did it not for glory, not for reward, but because her heart refused to look away. The days that followed were not easy. Raising a baby in a shack with no electricity, no running water, and barely enough food to feed one person, let alone two, was like trying to grow a flower in a storm. Every morning, Amaka woke before the sun, her body stiff from sleeping on a thin mat over damp ground. She'd check on Chimamanda first, the name they'd given the baby, meaning my God will not fail me, making sure she was warm, making sure she wasn't crying. Then she'd tie the baby to her back with a faded wrapper, sling her sack over her shoulder, and walk barefoot to the dump. The dump was a mountain of misery. Plastic bags fluttered like ghosts in the wind. Flies swarmed in thick clouds over rotting food. The stench was so strong it burned the back of your throat. Dogs fought over scraps. Children scavenged like animals. And in the middle of it all, Amaka worked, her small hands digging through filth, pulling out bottles, cans, bits of metal, anything that could be sold for a few coins. She was mocked. She was laughed at. Look at her, people said. A child playing mother to another child. Some spat as she passed. Others called her names, whispering that the baby was hers, that she was a disgrace. But Amaka kept her head down. She didn't fight. She didn't cry in front of them. She just worked harder. Because every coin she earned meant milk. Every naira meant medicine for her mother. Every step she took was a promise, to Mama Amaka, to Chimamanda, to herself, that she would not give up. There were nights when hunger clawed at her stomach like a wild thing. Nights when Chimamanda cried and Amaka had nothing to give her but water mixed with a little gari, soaked until it was thin and tasteless. She'd rock the baby, humming the lullaby her mother used to sing, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mandy. I'm so sorry I can't do more." But she never let go. And in those quiet moments when the swamp was still and the frogs croaked in the distance, something inside her grew. Not just strength, though she had that in abundance. Not just courage, though she faced every day like a warrior. No, what grew inside her was purpose. A deep, unshakable knowing that she was meant for more than survival, that this baby in her arms wasn't just a burden, she was a gift, a reason to keep going. Mama Amaka saw it too. Even in her pain, even as her legs swelled and her body weakened, she watched her daughter with pride. "You carry the weight of a queen," she whispered one night, her voice soft but full of fire. "And one day the world will see it." But the world wasn't ready. One afternoon, as Amaka stood by the roadside begging for milk, a woman in a shiny car rolled down her window. She looked at Amaka with cold eyes. "Why are you out here with a baby?" she asked. "Don't you know you're throwing your life away?" Amaka didn't answer. What could she say? That she wasn't throwing her life away, she was fighting for two lives. That every step she took was love in motion. The woman didn't wait for an answer. She rolled up her window and sped off, leaving dust in her wake. Amaka wiped her tears and looked down at Chimamanda, who was asleep against her chest. "They don't understand," she whispered. "But I do. I know what love costs, and I'd pay it 1,000 times over." Then came the day that changed everything. The sun was high, the air shimmered with heat. Amaka stood at the city gates, her sack at her feet, her hand outstretched, begging for help. Her throat was dry, her body ached. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, but Chimamanda needed milk. So she stood there, barefoot, desperate, hoping someone would see her. And someone did, from a distance, the sound of sirens. A convoy of black SUVs gliding through traffic like shadows. People scattered, but Amaka didn't move. She couldn't. She was too tired, too hungry, too focused on the baby in her arms. Then silence. The cars stopped, doors opened. and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Amaka's entire life. His face was lined with grief, his eyes heavy with years of pain. But when he saw the baby, when he saw the golden necklace around her tiny neck, something broke inside him. He fell to his knees, right there, on the hot, dusty road. Tears streamed down his face as he reached for the child. He didn't speak at first. He just held her, pressed her to his chest, sobbed like a man who had lost everything and just found it again. Amaka trembled. She wanted to run. She wanted to hold Chimamanda tighter and disappear into the crowd. This was her sister, her joy, her reason to keep breathing. But then the man looked at her, and in his eyes she didn't see anger, she didn't see greed. She saw gratitude, raw, real, unfiltered. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Amaka," she whispered. He repeated it like a prayer. "Amaka, you saved my daughter." And in that moment the world shifted, because this man wasn't just any man. He was Chief Anjuka, a billionaire. A man whose name was spoken with fear and respect. A man who had spent months mourning the loss of his only child, believing she had been stolen and killed. And now here she was alive, breathing in the arms of a girl who had nothing. He didn't offer money. He didn't hand her a check. He looked into her eyes and said, "You saved my life." And he meant it. But what happened next, what Amaka said, is what broke hearts across the city. Because when the chief asked what she wanted in return, she didn't ask for a mansion. She didn't ask for gold. She didn't ask for a new life. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Please help my mother. She's sick. She's dying." Can you imagine that? A child, starving, barefoot, living in a shack, given the chance to ask for anything in the world, and she asks for someone else. That moment, that single act of selflessness, did more than change Amaka's life. It changed the soul of a nation. Because while the world measures worth in money, in power, in bloodlines, this little girl, raised in the dirt, taught everyone what true value really is. Love, sacrifice, courage, and it all started in a dump, with a cry, and a girl who refused to walk away. The city never forgets a story like this. Not when it's written in dust, in tears, in the quiet courage of a child who chose love over survival. Not when a billionaire fell to his knees, not in worship of wealth, but in gratitude to a girl who had nothing, yet gave everything. And so, as the sun rose over the rooftops of Lagos, washing the sky in soft gold and pink, the name Amaka was no longer just a whisper in the slums. It was a roar in the headlines, a spark in every heart that had ever felt forgotten, a reminder that even in the filth of the dump, destiny can breathe. But while the world celebrated, Amaka sat in silence, not in sorrow, but in awe. She wasn't used to clean sheets. She wasn't used to a room with walls that didn't shake when the wind blew. She wasn't used to a bed that didn't smell of damp and mold. And she certainly wasn't used to people looking at her not with pity or disgust, but with reverence. She still remembered the night she found Chimamanda, the way her tiny fingers curled around nothing, as if reaching for a love she'd already lost. The way her voice cracked with cold and fear. The way the flies swarmed and the rats scurried, and the stench of rot clung to every breath. And she remembered her own promise whispered into the dark, with no one to hear but God and the stars. "You're not dying here. I won't let you." She had no idea that those words, spoken by a barefoot girl in a torn wrapper, would echo across a nation, that they would shake the foundations of power, that they would expose betrayal, unravel lies, and bring a broken man back to life. But they did. And now, as she sat in the hospital garden with her mother, watching the sun dip behind the trees, Amaka finally understood something. She hadn't just saved a baby. She had saved a family. She had saved a man from a life of grief so deep it could have swallowed him whole. She had saved a legacy from being stolen by greed. And in doing so, she had saved herself not from poverty but from the quiet death of a heart that stops believing. Her mother reached for her hand, her fingers still thin, still scarred from the infection, but strong now, stronger than they'd been in years. "You know," Mama Amaka said, her voice soft like the evening breeze, "I used to dream of a better life, not for me, for you. I used to pray that one day you'd walk into a classroom with shoes on your feet, that you'd hold a book and not have to worry about where your next meal was coming from." Amaka looked at her, eyes glistening. "And now," her mother continued, "you're not just in a classroom, you're in the hearts of millions. You're not just wearing shoes, you're walking in grace, And I get to watch it happen. A single tear rolled down Amaka's cheek, not from sadness, from fullness. From the overwhelming truth that sometimes when you give your last drop of love, the universe gives back not just survival but dignity. She thought of the days she spent at the dump, her back aching, her hands raw, her stomach hollow. She thought of the whispers, she's not her mother, that baby isn't hers, she's just a thief playing hero. She thought of the wealthy woman in the car who judged her without knowing her name. And now those same people bowed their heads when they saw her. Now they called her hero. Now they said that's the girl who changed everything. But Amaka didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who simply couldn't walk away. Because in that moment when she heard the cry in the dark, she didn't calculate. She didn't ask, what will this cost me? She didn't think about food or money or school or her own future. She just ran. And that single act of not turning away, that was what changed the world. Not because it was grand, but because it was true. Because love, real love, doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't live in a mansion. It lives in the choice to stay when everything tells you to leave. And Amaka stayed. She stayed through hunger, through shame, through fear. Through nights when she fed Chimamanda watered-down gari and prayed it wouldn't be the last meal she ever ate. She stayed when her body begged her to rest. She stayed when her heart begged her to give up. And because she stayed, a billionaire got his daughter back. A mother got her healing. A nation got a story worth remembering, but the story wasn't over, because while the world celebrated, shadows still moved in the corners of power. Chief Anjuka's relatives, the ones who had plotted in silence, who had paid a servant to steal the baby, who had believed that with the child gone, the empire would fall into their hands, they were not at the hospital. They were not at the Thanksgiving event. They were not clapping. They were not weeping. They were plotting, and they were afraid. Because a truth once buried doesn't stay buried forever. And the golden necklace, the heirloom, the symbol of lineage, the proof of identity, it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a ticking clock. Because Chief Anjuka was not a man who tolerated betrayal. And now, with his daughter safe in his arms and the girl who saved her standing beside him like family, he began to ask questions. Who knew about the necklace? Who had access to the nursery that night? Who stood to gain if the child disappeared? And slowly, like cracks in dry earth, the truth began to spread. The servant Dyke, the one who had taken the baby, had disappeared, but not before leaving behind a letter, a confession, found tucked inside a drawer in his abandoned room, addressed to Chief Anjuka. It read, "I am sorry, I was weak. They promised me money. They promised me a new life. I did not want to do it, but I was poor. I was desperate. I laid her in the dump, but I left the necklace on. I thought maybe someone would find her. Maybe someone would care. I pray she is alive. And if she is, I hope you forgive me. I cannot live with what I've done." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting was matched, and the name Yuzuzo was mentioned, the cousin, the one who had slammed his fist on the table and said, "The child must not live." Chief Anjuka read the letter once, then again, then a third time, and then he did something no one expected. He didn't call the police. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply folded the letter, placed it in his pocket, and walked into the garden where Amaka and her mother were sitting. He knelt beside them, and he said, "The people who did this, they thought power was money. They thought power was control, but they were wrong." Amaka looked at him. "Power," he said, "is love, and you, Amaka, have more power than all of them combined." Because she did. She had the power to heal, the power to forgive, the power to love without condition. And that was a power no amount of money could buy. Weeks passed. Mama Amaka healed. She walked again, not with a limp, not with pain, but with pride. She wore a new dress to the Thanksgiving event. She sat in the front row. She watched as her daughter was honored by the rich, the famous, the powerful, and she smiled, not because of the applause, not because of the cameras, but because her daughter, her Amaka, had proven that goodness is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. And Amaka returned to school, not as the girl who missed classes to pick trash, not as the one who wore the same faded dress every day, but as a girl with a new uniform, new books, new shoes, and a new fire in her heart. She studied hard. She raised her hand in class. She wrote essays about justice, about compassion, about the night she found a baby in the dump. And when her teacher asked the class to share their dreams, Amaka stood up, not shyly but with quiet strength, and said, "I want to be a lawyer." Not just any lawyer, A lawyer for children who have no one, for the ones left in the gutters, for the ones no one sees. The classroom fell silent. Then one by one her classmates began to clap, even the ones who had once mocked her, even the ones who had called her trash girl, because they could see it now, not just her story but her soul. And her soul was not broken, it was unbreakable. But the greatest moment came not in a classroom, not in a hospital, not even at the grand event with chandeliers and marble floors. It came on a quiet evening just after sunset. Amaka sat on the porch of her new home, a real house, with a roof that didn't leak, with clean water, with a bed that didn't sag. Chimamanda, now healthy and strong, played at her feet, giggling, reaching for her hands. And Amaka looked down at her, this child who had been thrown away like garbage, who had been meant to die, and she whispered, "You were never just a baby to me. You were a promise that love is stronger than hate, that light is stronger than darkness, that one act of kindness can change everything." And in that moment she knew she hadn't just found a baby, she had found her purpose. And her purpose wasn't just to survive, it was to rise, to speak, to fight, to love even when it costs everything. Because that's what changed the world, not money, not power, not bloodlines, but love. And Amaka, the girl from the dump, had more of that than anyone. So the story ends not with a fairy tale, not with they lived happily ever after, but with something deeper, something real. It ends with a girl who could have walked away but didn't, with a mother who was healed not just in body but in spirit, with a father who got his daughter back and found a daughter in the girl who saved her, with a nation that remembered what it means to be human. And with a truth that will echo for generations. The lowest can rise not because of luck but because of heart. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love. There are moments in life that don't just change a single person, they ripple outward, touching families, shifting communities, and even reshaping the soul of a nation. And sometimes those moments begin not in palaces or boardrooms but in silence, in darkness. In the cold, forgotten corners of the world where no one is watching, except the ones who care enough to stay. This was one of those moments, and it all centered around a girl named Amaka, a child who had once walked barefoot through trash and pain, who had carried the weight of survival on shoulders too small for such a burden. A girl who, when faced with a choice between walking away or stepping into the unknown, chose love. Now, weeks after the world had first heard her story, after the headlines had blazed her name across newspapers and television screens, after the grand Thanksgiving event where she stood before the rich and powerful like royalty, now, life had settled into something new, something quiet, something real. She no longer woke to the stench of rot or the sound of rats scurrying across rusted zinc. She no longer flinched at the sound of rain pouring through a broken roof. She no longer stood on dusty roads with her hand outstretched, begging for milk. No, now she woke to sunlight streaming through clean glass windows, to the soft hum of a ceiling fan, to the smell of warm bread and tea rising from the kitchen, to the sound of her mother's laughter, a sound that had once been buried beneath years of pain and silence. Mama Amaka was not just healed, she was alive. Her leg, once swollen and lifeless, now carried her through the house with steady steps. She cooked, she cleaned. She danced in the kitchen when no one was looking, twirling like a young woman again, her face glowing with a joy she never thought she'd feel. And Amaka, she walked to school, not barefoot, not in rags, but in polished shoes, her hair neatly braided, her uniform crisp and new. She carried a backpack filled with books, real books, with her name written inside in careful handwriting. And every step she took was a quiet rebellion against the world that once told her she was nothing, because she wasn't nothing. She was someone. She was the girl who had picked a baby out of the trash and refused to let her die. She was the girl who had asked not for riches, but for her mother's healing. She was the girl who had made a billionaire fall to his knees, not in power, but in gratitude. And now, as she sat in her classroom, listening to her teacher speak about justice and human rights, she felt something stir inside her again, not the desperation of survival, but the fire of purpose. She wasn't just back in school, she was back on a path toward becoming a lawyer, not for the rich, not for the powerful, but for the ones like her, the ones who had no voice, the ones who were forgotten, the ones who were left in the gutters. And every day she studied harder. She read every book she could find. She wrote essays about compassion, about poverty, about the night she found Chimamanda. And slowly the whispers in the classroom changed. It was, "There's that trash girl anymore." It was, "That's Amaka. She saved a billionaire's daughter." And then one day it became, "That's Amaka. She's going to change the world." But while the world celebrated her rise, shadows still moved in silence. Because greed, true greed, doesn't die easily. It hides, it waits, it plots. And in the quiet corners of Chief Anjuka's mansion, where the marble floors echoed with footsteps and the chandeliers cast long shadows, a storm was brewing. Yuzuzo, the cousin who had once slammed his fist on the table and said, "The child must not live," was unraveling. He had watched from the back of the hall during the Thanksgiving event, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists beneath the table. He had seen Amaka honored. He had seen Chief Anjuka call her family. He had heard the vow that she would live under his protection, that she would be treated as his own. And he knew, the truth was coming. Because secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of rising like smoke from a fire that never truly goes out. And the fire had already started. It began with a letter, a confession, left behind by Dyke, the servant who had taken the baby that night, the man who had laid Chimamanda in the dump, wrapped in a torn blanket and walked away with blood on his hands and guilt in his heart. He had disappeared. No one knew where he went, but before he vanished he left a letter. Addressed to Chief Anjuka. Handwritten, shaking, full of shame. "I am sorry, I was weak. They promised me money. They promised me a new life. I did not want to do it, but I was poor, I was desperate. I laid her in the dump, but I left the necklace on. I thought maybe someone would find her, maybe someone would care. I pray she is alive. And if she is, I hope you forgive me. I cannot live with what I've done." The handwriting was matched. The name Yuzuzo was mentioned. And Chief Anjuka, a man who had already lost his wife, who had buried his heart in silence, now faced a new kind of pain. Not the pain of loss, but the pain of betrayal by his own blood. By the people who had called him uncle, who had bowed before him at family gatherings, who had smiled in his face while plotting to steal his empire. And now they sat in his home pretending innocence, pretending shock, pretending grief. But he could see through it, because grief doesn't look like anger. And betrayal doesn't hide behind fake tears, so he waited. He didn't rage, he didn't scream, he didn't call the police. Not yet, because justice, real justice, isn't just about punishment, it's about truth. And he wanted the world to see what had been done, not in silence, not behind closed doors, but in the light. So he began to gather evidence. Private investigators, bank records, phone logs, security footage from that night. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. When it was complete, he called a family meeting, not in the mansion, not in private, but in the grand hall where Amaka had been honored. The same hall filled with chandeliers and marble floors. The same hall where the city's elite had once stood and clapped. Only this time there would be no applause. This time there would be reckoning. The day of the meeting arrived. The air was thick with tension. Relatives arrived in their finest clothes, agbadas embroidered with gold lace gowns shimmering under the lights. They smiled. They hugged. They whispered pleasantries, but their eyes were sharp, nervous, watching. Chief Anjuka stood at the front holding Chimamanda in his arms. Amaka sat beside him, her presence no longer an afterthought but a statement, because she wasn't just there as a guest, she was there as a witness, as a symbol, as proof that love, not greed, had won. When the room fell silent, Chief Anjuka spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a man who had lost everything and found it again. "My family," he began, "I asked you here today not to celebrate, not to eat, not to pretend we are united. I asked you here to face the truth." A murmur ran through the room. Yuzuzo shifted in his seat. "I lost my wife," Chief Anjuka continued. "And I believed I had lost my daughter. I buried my heart with her. I lived in silence. I stopped believing in goodness." He paused, then looked directly at Yuzuzo. "But my daughter was not dead." The room froze. "She was alive." Another pause. "She was found not by you, not by any of my blood, but by a girl who had nothing. A girl who lived in a shack on sinking mud, a girl who picked trash to survive." He gestured to Amaka. "This girl Amaka found my daughter in a dump. She took her home, she fed her, she protected her, she loved her." His voice cracked. "And when I offered her anything, riches, power, a new life, she asked only for her mother's healing." Silence. Then slowly he pulled out the letter. "I also found something else." He held it up, A confession from the man who took my child, from the man who left her to die. He looked at Yuzuzo, and he named you. The room erupted, gasps, screams, shouts. Yuzuzo shot to his feet. This is lies, he shouted. This is a setup. That servant is a thief. He's trying to blame me to save himself. But Chief Anjuka didn't flinch. He simply unfolded the letter and began to read. And as the words filled the hall, the truth, raw and unfiltered, the masks fell, one by one. The lies unraveled, the greed was exposed, and when he finished, the room was silent. No one clapped, no one spoke, because the truth had spoken, and the truth was heavier than any wealth. Chief Anjuka looked at Yuzuzo. You wanted my empire, a pause. You wanted my pain, another pause, but you forgot one thing. He stepped forward. You forgot that love always finds a way. Then without another word, he turned to the guards. Remove him. And just like that, the man who had plotted to kill an innocent baby was led away, not in handcuffs but in shame. No trial was needed, because the court of public truth had already judged him. And the sentence, not prison, not money, but the weight of knowing that a child with nothing had done more with love than he ever could with power. And that was the greatest punishment of all. But the story didn't end there. Because Amaka, the girl at the center of it all, didn't stop. She didn't rest. She didn't fade into silence. No, she rose, she studied, she spoke. And one day, months later, she stood on a stage again, not in a dress, but in a school uniform. She had been invited to speak at a national youth conference, a room filled with hundreds of students, educators, and leaders. And when she stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply spoke softly, clearly, with a strength that came not from pride but from purpose. I was 12 years old, she began, when I found a baby in the dump. I was hungry, I was tired, I had nothing, but I couldn't walk away. She paused. Because sometimes the world doesn't need more money, it doesn't need more power, it just needs someone who won't look away. The room held its breath. I didn't know she was a billionaire's daughter. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. All I knew was that she was cold, she was crying, and she needed love. Another pause. And I realized in that moment that love isn't something you earn, it's something you give, even when you have nothing left. Tears filled the room. And if I can teach you one thing today, she continued, it's this. You don't need to be rich to be powerful. You don't need to be famous to be important. You just need to care. You just need to stay. You just need to say, I won't let you die here. The room exploded. Not with applause, with roars. Students stood, teachers wept, leaders bowed their heads because they weren't just hearing a story. They were witnessing a revolution of the heart, and it had started in a dump with a cry and a girl who refused to walk away. And now her voice was spreading. Schools began teaching her story. Communities started programs for abandoned children. The Amaka Foundation grew not just in Nigeria but across Africa. And every child who walked into a classroom with a full stomach, a clean uniform, and a book in their hand, they owed it to her. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, but because she had chosen love when no one was watching. And that changed everything. So the story ends not with a fairy tale, not with happily ever after, but with something deeper, something real. It ends with a girl who could have walked away but didn't. With a mother who was healed not just in body but in spirit. With a father who got his daughter back and found a daughter in the girl who saved her. With a nation that remembered what it means to be human. And with a truth that will echo for generations. The lowest can rise not because of luck but because of heart. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love. There are stories that begin in silence. Not the kind of silence that is empty, but the kind that hums with unseen power, like the stillness before a storm or the breath before a cry. This is one of those stories. It didn't start in a palace. It didn't begin with a fanfare of trumpets or the flash of cameras. It began in a place most people drive past and never look at twice, a dump. A mountain of rotting food, broken glass, and forgotten lives. And in that place, where hope seemed buried under layers of filth, a miracle unfolded not with thunder but with a whisper. That whisper was a cry. A baby's cry, faint, weak, barely there. And it was heard by a girl named Amaka, a child so small, so poor, so overlooked by the world that she didn't even own a pair of shoes. She walked barefoot through the mud and the trash, her body thin from hunger, her spirit worn thin from grief and responsibility. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to hear that cry, but she did. And in that moment, something inside her, something deep, something ancient, something pure said no. No, this child will not die, not today, not while I'm here. And so she ran. She didn't think about what it would cost her. She didn't wonder if she could feed another mouth. She didn't stop to ask if she was strong enough. She just ran, bare feet slapping against the wet earth, heart pounding, breath sharp in her chest, until she found her. A tiny bundle wrapped in a torn, filthy blanket. A newborn baby, shivering, pale, abandoned like trash. Amaka fell to her knees. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out for help. She simply reached out, pulled the baby close, and wrapped her in the only warm thing she had, her scarf. And as she held that child against her chest, she whispered, "You're not dying here. I won't let you." And in that moment, in that quiet, desperate act of love, the universe shifted. Because this baby wasn't just any child. She was the lost daughter of Chief Anjuka, one of the richest men in Nigeria, the only heir to a billion-dollar empire, stolen at birth by greedy relatives who wanted the fortune for themselves, left to die in the gutters so power could pass into their hands. But fate had other plans, and fate chose Amaka, a girl with nothing, a girl the world had forgotten, to be the one to save her. Now, fast forward. Picture this, a convoy of black SUVs gliding through the city, sirens blaring, people scattering, and inside the lead vehicle sits Chief Anjuka, a man broken by grief. His wife died giving birth to their child, and days later the baby vanished. No trace, no clues, just silence. He mourned her as dead, buried his heart with his wife, lived in a mansion of marble and gold, but his soul was empty, until one day, until he sees her. In the arms of a ragged, starving girl standing by the roadside begging for milk. Around the baby's neck, a golden necklace, an heirloom, the last gift his dying wife gave their child, a secret only he and his closest family knew about. His breath catches, his world stops. He orders the car to halt, steps out, kneels on the hot, dusty road. Tears stream down his face as he reaches for the child, his daughter, alive, breathing, saved by a girl who had nothing, yet gave everything. And when he turns to Amaka, trembling and afraid, he doesn't offer money. He doesn't hand her a check. He looks into her eyes and says, "You saved my life," because she did. But here's what will break your heart and then rebuild it. Amaka doesn't ask for riches, doesn't beg for a mansion or a new life. She whispers, tears in her eyes, "Please help my mother. She's sick. She's dying." And in that moment, a billionaire, a man used to power and control, is humbled by the purest act of selflessness he's ever witnessed. Because while the world measures worth in money, in status, in bloodlines, this little girl, raised in a shack on sinking mud, taught everyone what true value really is. Love, sacrifice, courage. This isn't just a story about a lost child found. It's about how one act of kindness, one decision to do the right thing when no one was watching, can ripple across lives, shatter destinies, and rewrite futures. It's about how the lowest can rise not because of luck but because of heart. And it all started in a dump, with a cry, and a girl who refused to walk away. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the swamp, to the house made of rusted zinc and plastic bags, to the nights when rain poured through the roof and rats scurried over their thin mat, to a mother named Mama Amaka, barely surviving, paying $5 a month for a shelter that wasn't even a real home, and to a little girl who dreamed of school, of becoming a lawyer, of building her mother a house where no rain could ever leak in. But dreams don't feed the hungry. And when Mama Amaka stepped on a rusty nail while scavenging for trash, infection set in fast. No money for medicine. No doctor would come. And Amaka, just 12 years old, made a promise. She would take her mother's place. She would pick trash. She would sell scraps. She would save her. And so every morning she walked barefoot to the dump, her small hands digging through filth, her back aching under the weight of the sack, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. She was a child playing the role of a parent. And then she found the baby. And everything changed. Because in that moment she didn't just save a life. She picked up destiny. And destiny, once held, never lets go. There are moments, rare, sacred, almost too beautiful to believe, when the universe leans in and whispers, "This is where the story changes." And this was one of them. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of a girl. A girl who had once walked barefoot through mountains of rotting trash, her stomach hollow, her feet blistered, her heart heavy with the weight of survival. A girl who, when faced with a choice between turning away or stepping into the unknown, chose love. Her name was Amaka, and in that moment when she heard the faint cry of a baby abandoned like garbage, she didn't hesitate. She ran. She knelt. She picked up that tiny, shivering life and held it close, not because she knew who the child was, but because she knew what it meant to be forgotten. She didn't know the baby was the lost daughter of one of the richest men in Nigeria. She didn't know that around the child's neck hung a golden necklace, an heirloom, a secret, a symbol of a bloodline worth billions. She didn't know that her act of kindness would expose a conspiracy of greed, shatter a family built on lies, and bring a broken man back from the edge of despair. All she knew was this: a baby was crying, and she couldn't walk away. And because she didn't, everything changed. Because love, real love, doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't live in a mansion. It lives in the quiet decision to stay when the world tells you to leave, to give when you have nothing, to care when no one is watching. And Amaka cared. She cared through hunger. She cared through shame. She cared through nights when she fed the baby watered-down gari and prayed it wouldn't be the last meal she ever ate. She cared when people mocked her, when they called her trash girl, when they said she was throwing her life away. She cared when her body begged her to rest. She cared when her heart begged her to give up. And because she cared, a billionaire got his daughter back. A mother got her healing. A nation got a story worth remembering. But the story didn't end with applause. It didn't end with a mansion. It didn't end with a happily ever after wrapped in gold and silk. It ended with something deeper, something real. It ended with a girl who could have asked for anything and asked only for her mother's life. It ended with a father who had lost everything and found it again in the arms of a child who had nothing. It ended with justice, not with handcuffs, but with truth. With a man named Uzuzo, the cousin who had plotted in shadows, who had said, "The child must not live," being exposed not by a court but by the weight of his own shame. And it ended with a foundation. The Amaka Foundation, born not from wealth but from compassion. A promise that no child would have to suffer what she suffered. That no mother would have to watch her daughter pick trash to survive. That no baby would be left to die in the gutters. And now her name echoes in classrooms. Now her story is told in homes. Now children across Nigeria look at her and say, "I can rise too," because she proved it. She proved that the lowest can rise not because of luck but because of heart. She proved that love is the most powerful force in the world, stronger than money, stronger than power, stronger than hate. And she proved it not with a speech, not with a sword, but with a scarf. A scarf she wrapped around a freezing baby. A scarf that became a symbol of everything she was: warm, humble, full of love. Now years later, if you walk through the city, you'll see her. Not in rags, not in the dump, but in a classroom, in a courtroom. In a hall where young girls look up to her like she's a queen. And maybe she is, because queens aren't born in palaces. They're forged in fire, in pain. In the quiet moments when no one is watching and you choose to do the right thing anyway. So the story ends not with a fairy tale, not with "they lived happily ever after," but with a truth that will echo for generations. The most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love. And Amaka, the girl from the dump, had more of that than anyone. Now, here's the question I want to leave you with. What would you have done if you heard that cry in the dark? Would you have kept walking? Would you have looked away? Or would you have run barefoot, broken but brave, toward the sound, ready to carry a life you didn't ask for just because it needed you? Because that's the thing about destiny. It doesn't come with warning. It doesn't knock politely on your door. It shows up in the dirt, in the dark, in the cry of a child no one else will hear. And it asks one simple question: will you answer? If you were touched by this story, if it made you pause, made you feel, made you believe in goodness again, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is standing in their own dump wondering if they matter. And your share, that small act of kindness, might be the light they've been searching for. So go ahead. Hit that share button. Tell someone this story. And remember, you don't need to be rich to be powerful. You don't need to be famous to be important. You just need to care. You just need to stay. You just need to say, "I won't let you die here." Because sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, to change a nation, to change the world.